Fate Be Changed, Chapter 24, Elinor. Elinor reached under her hooded cloak to tug at the curch covering her hair. She had donned both garments in hope of disguising her face. Not that she expected many of the shopkeepers or villagers to recognize her. It had been years since she had visited this tiny village in her father's kingdom. Nevertheless, Elinor did not want to take any chances. "I've changed my mind, Princess. I no longer agree with this plan," Fergus said underneath his breath. "Not after talking to my men." While Merida and Elinor had returned to the castle for their disguises, Fergus had gone to his camp. Once there, his men told him they had overheard a lad mention that some chieftains were dissatisfied with the running of the kingdom, and thought a new ruler was in order. It was exactly what Merida had posited earlier. This new information did not change Elinor's approach. "It is too late to change your mind," Elinor said. She struck his side with her elbow. "Do not call me princess. You will give us away." "Fine, dear," he gritted out. "As your husband, I demand you return home." Elinor cut her eyes to him. Why the sudden change? Earlier he had been impressed by her plan. Elinor had suggested they come into the village under the guise of a married couple. Fergus was posing as a vicar from Grawi, and she was his devoted wife. As that would ever happen. "Spending the afternoon as your wife is not my idea of an enjoyable time either," she said. "I pity the poor woman who will eventually be stuck with you." She ignored the twinge of discontentment that fluttered in her stomach at the thought of Fergus married to another and directed her attention to the scene before them. The village that housed this portion of Clan Inez was tiny, but had a robust merchant area. The clan's red tartan could be seen hanging from store windows and wrapped about the torsos and shoulders of many who walked in and out of the shops. Elinor smiled and nodded at a man who crossed the front of them on the way into a blacksmith shop. Then she turned to Fergus. "I'm not going home until we speak with the parchmenter. Either you join me, or you go back to that dusty camp of yours. Now which is it?" "You are one vexing woman. Do you know that?" Fergus pulled at the tight collar of his vestments. "Let us be done with this. I want out of these clothes." "I don't know why. You look far better in them than anything else I've seen on you," she said, before considering the implications of her words. She did not want to reveal that she gave any thought of his appearance whatsoever. Fergus glanced at her, a rascally grin at the corner of his lips. "Do not utter a word," Elinor said, her cheeks heating. "Tell me, lass, do you prefer my green linnet or the brown one?" He winked. "I also have several in black back at Castle Dunbrock. I can model them for you." "Let us go," Elinor said, ignoring his laugh. They started down the wide, dusty road that ran through the middle of the village. She immediately fell behind. She would have had a difficult time keeping up with his long strides, even if the shoes she had pilfered from Orla's room were not too big for her. She had no choice. One look at any shoe she owned and the villagers would have known she was royalty. "Slow down," Elinor said. "Keep up," Fergus countered. "We don't have much time." He looked up at the sky. "You and your maid will need to head back before the sun begins its descent. Where is she, by the way?" Merida said she needed to visit the village woodcarver. Something about needing supplies for our lessons. She knows that she is to meet us in front of the butcher shop, when the bell tolls for vespers, Elinor said, referring to the observance period for early evening prayer. She leaned over to Fergus and asked, "Now, where did your men say they heard whispers about this threat?" "It was at the farrier's. They were tending to the horses when they overheard the lad." Elinor pressed a hand to her stomach to staunch the instant panic that had settled there. Could the chieftains really be plotting to overthrow the king? It would not be the first time such an attack had launched on her country's history. Fergus halted. He turned to her, leaned forward until they were eye level, and in a low voice said, "You must let me do the talking, lass." But nothing. He cuts her off. "If you want these villagers to believe you are a vicar's wife, you cannot go around questioning their menfolk. It is just not done." Elinor knew she was right, but that did not mean she had to like it. She begrudgingly nodded her agreement before motioning for him to come. She and Fergus visited the parchmenter, but to their disappointment the man did not keep an account of those who purchased his wares, and he did not have any more of the particular parchment used for the message Fergus's men had found. They had visited the farrier's shop, then the blacksmith's. Elinor had to admit that Fergus was skillful in his reproach, inquiring about the men's satisfaction with the running of the kingdom, with just enough detachment so as to not rouse suspicion. He came off as a simple country vicar, interested in the goings-on of a village similar to his own. Elinor smiled and nodded when appropriate. It was vexing to play the role of a mute, obedient wife, but to her surprise, Fergus asked all the questions she instructed him to, and convincingly so. There was no denying that the two of them made a good team. "Would you mind if we take a short break?" Elinor asked after visiting their fifth merchant of the day. She took a seat on the bench hewn out of a massive log. "I do not know how Orla can bear walking in these shoes all day." "Do you need a drink?" Fergus asked. "I can fetch you mead or ale." Elinor faltered at his thoughtfulness. It was the second time he had inquired about her needs that day. Thank you, but I do not need any." She was just about to ask which merchant they should visit next when she looked across the road and noticed the boy picking through rubbish. She gasped when he dusted off a half-eaten apple and took a bite. "No!" she said, and started for him. "What is it?" Fergus asked, pulling her back. He gestured to the boy, who had ducked into the narrow passageway between the potter's and the wool merchant's shops. "I just witnessed a child eating a discarded apple." She looked up at Fergus. "No one in this kingdom should be made to eat garbage. How is it even allowed?" But as she said the words, Elinor realized that she had allowed it. She was part of the problem. This was her kingdom. As a member of the royal family, it was her duty to look in on the people who resided on McCameron land and to make sure they were taken care of. Yet she had not visited this village since she was but a wee lass. "Princess," Fergus whispered against her ear, "do not fret, I shall find him." Before she knew what he was about, Fergus took off in search of the boy. He returned with him moments later and headed straight for the baker. Elinor watched in awe as he purchased a thick loaf of bread and handed it to the boy, along with several coins. Elinor's heart flipped within her chest. She was so overwhelmed with emotion that she could barely speak when Fergus returned to her side. Thank you for doing that," she said. "You were right. No one should have to eat garbage. In an ideal kingdom, there would be more than enough food for everyone." She tilted her head to the side as she studied him. "What is your idea of an ideal kingdom?" Elinor asked. Fergus shrugged his broad shoulders. "Simple. One where all citizens can live healthy, comfortable lives, and where there is a strong kinship between the clans." He glanced at her. "That is not to say that King Douglas is not a strong king. He is able to form a peace alliance between the clans for generations of fighting. He is doing the best he can, I suppose." "Yes, he is," Elinor said, quick to defend her father. "But more could be done for the people of this kingdom," she had to admit. "My thoughts are on an ideal kingdom very much aligned with yours." "Do they now?" Fergus asked. She nodded, her eyes focused on his strong jawline and firm lips. "I shall make certain one of my clansmen returns in 2 days' time to check on the boy," Fergus said. "The bread and silver should keep him fed until then." Elinor started to reach for him, then instinctively pulled back her hand. She folded both hands in her lap and gave him a short, regal nod. "It is a very kind gesture," she said. "Even for a boggin numpty?" he said with a wry grin. A heated flush crept across Elinor's cheeks. "I apologize for that," she said. Fergus shrugged his massive shoulders. "I tend to smell from time to time." His expression turned serious. "But do not take me for a fool, Princess." Her breath caught in her throat. She shook her head. "I do not," she said. "Your clansmen would not treat you with such difference if you were a fool." Elinor tried to tear her attention away from his intense stare, but his gaze held her captive for several moments more. Finally, he said, "We must continue with our inquest. 'Tis getting late." Elinor followed him from the potter's, then into the alehouse. However, by the time the bells rang out for the tower of the small church, she and Fergus were still no closer to solving the riddle from the discarded parchmenter, or uncovering any more information regarding disgruntled chieftains. They headed to the butcher shop, where they found Merida waiting. Elinor frowned and pointed to her hands. "You were not wearing gloves when we arrived." "Yes, I know," she said. "I bought them here in this village." She stuck her hands behind her back. "Let us be on our way. If I am not in the larder to ready the fish on tomorrow's meal, Eileen will have my hide." The remainder about the next day's dinner instantly soured Elinor's mood. How she wished she could stay here. She would happily continue to play Fergus's pretend wife if it meant that she would not have to face the man who was to be her real husband. Assuming her role for the last time, Elinor tucked her arms in the crook of Fergus's and said, "Yes, let us be on our way."